1:29. Do you know what that is?
1:29.
Yeah, that was the time my dog woke me up this morning to go out to the bathroom.
Are you serious?
1:29 a.m.
You know what I do when my dog wakes me up?
What?
I pretend I'm asleep and Caroline has to get up, take him out.
Caroline, if you're listening, gig is up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1:29.
I have a feeling I've got a punch in the ribs in my future.
Yeah. You're hoping it's the ribs. Hey, listen, 1:29 in the morning, our dog's like 15 years old and like very close to meeting Jesus, which if I'm honest, I don't think he's going to meet Jesus.
Does his breath smell like he's dying on the inside?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a dog like that.
But he almost met him this morning.
Yeah,
that was pretty rough. Well, we're back. Me and Jesse Crowe here today and continuing our Western theology and this life on the trail. We kind of talked about this briefly the other day, just with all the different encounters that you can have out on the trail. I threw this idea out to you of asking, and we didn't share, with each other anything other than just this topic to kick off with. Have you ever had a celebrity encounter? Have you ever met a celebrity?
What level celebrity are we talking about?
Any. I mean, I've met local celebrity.
I had a local celebrity encounter.
Who is that?
Pam Huff.
Pam Huff.
Remember Pam Huff?
Yeah, from the news.
Yeah. If you're from Alabama, you know who Pam Huff is.
In fact, you know my mom really well. But when I was growing up, she had one of those monster-ass like camcorders, that looked like a news, in the 80s.
It's one you prop up on your shoulder.
Yeah. You had to wear like a back brace to hold the thing. And
made the conk sound when you put the tape in there.
My dad, here comes Pam Huff. So...
Pam Huff has a striking resemblance to Aunt Bee from Andy Griffith.
Yeah. Which, consequently, they said she wasn't a very nice lady.
Pam Huff?
Well, Aunt Bee.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
I think Pam Huff is nice.
Hey, here's a fun fact about Aunt Bee. Mm-hmm. So, now, none of this is verified, okay? This is just shit that I've heard, okay? So, it could be bullshit. I don't know.
Right.
But she was a cat lady. Did you know that?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's
true. She had a lot of cats.
True. Yeah, this is true.
And she ended up moving to where, North, South Carolina, wherever they recorded there.
Yeah, it was Mount Pilot.
But she ended up moving there because she fell in love with the landscape there. And she died alone with a bunch of cats. Mm-hmm. And they say that some of the cats, stray cats that are around that area, that they think their lineage.
Man, come on now.
That's what I heard.
Come on.
One of Aunt Bee's cats. You may have a great granddaughter or grandson cat if you get one from that area of Aunt Bee.
Just look and see if they're pretentious or something like that, and maybe that shows. I remember reading something. I don't remember if it was Andy and Don Knotts tried to even go visit her. Maybe it was Ron Howard. It was somebody.
I think it was Andy.
Yeah, she wouldn't let them in.
Yeah,
even.
I think her house was gross.
Yeah, well, it was just her and a bunch of cats.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So,
all right. So how did the encounter with Pam Huff go? Was she nice?
Well, I was, I was like, I think I was 18, 19 years old, and I was at the Galleria with some of my friends. And I walked by, and I guess she was with one of her kids. I don't know if she even has kids. She was with a teenage girl.
Yeah.
And I walked by, and I saw her double take, and I went, Pam Huff! And she looks up at me, and I went, are you reporting live from the Galleria?
Yeah.
And she rolled her eyes and walked away.
That's funny.
And I you know what?
Yeah.
In her defense, I'd have done the same thing.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll tell you a funny one. I didn't plan this one, but because I've got a pretty big celebrity I've met. It was pretty radical encounter. But one of the local ones, Taylor Hicks. You remember Taylor Hicks from American Idol?
Yeah.
I met him, and I shook his hand, and I just I was at a blank of what to say, and it was I loved you on American Idol, man. It's well, of course, that's the only place I would have known him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was thanks, pal. All right.
I never cared for Taylor Hicks.
Yeah, I liked him. I liked the Alabama folks. We had a real gullible employee at the time that Ruben Studdard was an American Idol finalist.
Yeah.
And he had that song Flying Without Wings, and it's talking about being in love, this high and stuff. And I'd ask him, I said, Mr. Sam, how the hell is he going to fly if he ain't got no wings? And he's like, man, you don't understand. He'd go and he'd just try to explain it. I was like, I just don't get it. I don't get it. The whole time it was just, a gag on him. But anyway, so my big celebrity, this is a bad encounter too.
I was about to say, Taylor Hicks couldn't have been your big celebrity.
No. Steven Seagal. Remember Steven Seagal? Have I ever told you this story?
I think I have heard this story, yeah.
So Jamie and I went to Memphis. It was just like a getaway weekend. I don't remember if it was an anniversary or whatever, but I do remember the year because this will come into the story later. It was right when YouTube started. And I had to Google that and, figure it out. It was like 2005, 2006 is when that first came out and started being a big thing. And which that's hard to believe that it's only been around that long. Feels like a lot longer. But we were staying at a very nice hotel in Memphis called the Peabody. Peabody's famous, it's famous in Memphis as like Graceland, all this stuff. Their big thing is it sounds weird if you've never been there, but they have these ducks that swim in the hotel lobby thing, and they actually have this guy that his main job is taking care of these ducks. He's dressed up nice, and they have this red carpet that these ducks walk on and go on this elevator, and they stay up on the roof, and you can go up there later and see them, but they bring them down, they march on. It's wild, okay? Very famous hotel.
Huh.
Well, it's obviously a lot older hotel, but we were staying there.
How about those ducks? Taste amazing.
Yeah, they probably do. They've been fed really well. But we're walking downtown Memphis area, we leave the hotel, and we're just going to go grab a bite to eat, come back to the hotel. Well, when we leave out of the hotel, lo and behold, Steven Seagal, very recognizable. He's not trying to hide who he is. He's got all his Indian looking jewelry that he wears, the turquoise and silver. Yeah, that guy. He's propped up, against the thing, one leg back, like he's the Marlboro Man, real cool, he thinks he's real cool. And we walk up to him. Jamie's like, man, that's, she didn't even know the guy's name. She just recognized him from TV. I said, yeah, it's Steven Seagal. And she said, that would be neat to get a picture with him or whatever, that we, encountered him. I said, well, let's go ask. I kid you not. We walk up. I wish the listeners could see this. But we walk up, and his handler steps guarding him. Right in the thing.
I thought he knew karate.
Yeah,
why does he need a handler?
Come on. I'm calling BS on that too. Yeah. I don't think he knows anything. If you watch videos that little slapping stuff he does, no, come on, man. But anyway, so the handler steps out, and I walk up and says, just wondering if we could get a picture, with Mr. Seagal. And the handler turns around, looks at Steven Seagal. Steven, I swear to God, this is where I said I wish they could see. Looks us up and down and just shakes his head no. Right in front of us. Doesn't say a word, doesn't address us, doesn't hey, I'm busy, I'm whatever. So, man, we walk. I said, that's fine. No problem. We walk off. Man, I'm pissed. I'm sitting at dinner. I'm all out with my wife. And it's like, Steven Seagal, I tell you. It's I don't even like that guy. Why did you make me walk up and get a picture? Or try to get a picture. So then, we eat our dinner, everything. We go back. He's standing in the same exact spot. Same exact spot. It's not like he was too busy to take a picture. He's been there for over an hour.
Yeah.
We've eaten a full dinner, walked, all this stuff. I tell Jamie, I said, I'm going to walk up and see if he'll take a picture with us. She said, please don't. Don't. And I was like, no. Dude's going to take a picture with us. I'm telling you. He's not busy. Whatever. I walk up, talk to the handler. I said, hey, can we get that picture now with Steven? Steven looks us up and down again and shakes his head no one more time. Just it got all over me. So here's where I go back to the YouTube thing. Standing right beside Steven Seagal was an orange parking cone. And I felt with my cat-like reflexes and ability, I told Jamie, I said, if I could sneak behind him and get that cone on his head, and we were able to post this to YouTube, I said, 1,000,000 hits.
Oh, yeah.
Easy. a million hits. I didn't do it. I didn't try. I was afraid of the karate. But I did give him a parting shot. Do you remember what it is? It was the only thing my sarcastic brain could think of in the moment because he was egotistical. I knew there was some pride involved in this.
Yeah.
I said to his handler, loud enough for Steven Seagal to hear, I said, man, that's a bummer because I loved that dude in Walker, Texas Ranger. That was the best I could come up with. So, Steven Seagal, if you're listening, you suck. If you encounter Steven Seagal, just tell him, yeah, I heard about this guy in Alabama. But, yeah, Walker, Texas Ranger. There you go.
Well, I think the fact that, which if you're listening to this, you need to go to Spotify and look up Steven Seagal's Jamaican song.
Yes.
I think that's payback enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty rough.
That's pretty terrible.
Yeah. So I've had a few others. I'm looking over here. We have not many podcast places have this, but a cardboard cutout of Dale Earnhardt. I met Dale Earnhardt one time. Several Alabama players, but yeah, that was by far my worst. So yeah, not a fan of Steven Seagal. So I know you didn't plan for that when you tuned in, but yeah,
there you go.
We hate Steven Seagal. So now we'll talk about Jesus and his love and mercy, even for jerks like Steven Seagal. It can happen. So
now go watch Mark for Death and watch him slap some Jamaicans around.
That's right. So if you've been with us, we've been talking about this book, Western Theology by Wes Seeliger. We've said it every time, very much our speed. It is each chapter is about 6 pages and has some cartoons in there as well that was drawn by the author. Going back to the old Western times, settlers and pioneers. And we discovered this from Brennan Manning's message, The Unsettling the Settlers. Again, encourage, if you haven't listened to that, you go back and do that. But each chapter is kind of compared and contrast settler theology, pioneer theology. Obviously, this is chapter 3. If you haven't listened to chapter 1 and 2, would encourage that. But just a quick recap of that. Chapter 1, settler theology, really it addressed the church, compared it to a courthouse, and then in pioneer theology, the covered wagon. Chapter 2 that got into talking about who God is. Settler theology had him as the mayor, pioneer theology as the trail boss. And so chapter 3, we look at Jesus. Before we even get into that, what do you think, Jesse, like some common misconceptions when people hear the name Jesus?
The first thing is that he's weak.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thinking back to my childhood, Jesus was weak and kind of indifferent,
mm-hmm.
Passive, pale.
Yeah.
It was a very lifeless image, not a lot of masculinity.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's like, I look back at my childhood growing up, and the people that led the churches that I was at
mm-hmm.
were that way.
Yeah.
They were weak men, sort of pale,
mm-hmm.
kind of didn't get out in the sun enough, no
right.
calluses on their hands.
Yeah.
It was almost like they were conforming to the image of this false Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The pictures on the walls of, I saw a picture yesterday
mm-hmm.
on Facebook, which I typically don't get on Facebook. I got on there to look for Marketplace. What was I looking for? Maybe somebody has what I need. Oh, I was looking for an old camper.
Yeah.
I just got on there every now and then I get on there to look, see.
Which housekeeping matters. I sent you a camper this morning on Marketplace.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
shout out Marketplace.
So I got on there and I immediately kind of hit my thumb, make the feed go up to see mm-hmm. who's posting what before I hit the Marketplace thing. And one of them was a picture of a church, I won't say the name, mm-hmm. that I used to go to as a teenager. Mm-hmm. My parents were members there. And they had this big picture behind the pulpit
mm-hmm.
of one of those Jesus with a robe and a staff and a lamb,
Yeah, yeah.
They still got that same damn picture.
Mm-hmm.
And standing in front of the picture was the same pastor.
Wow.
pale and hadn't been out. And I'm like, dude, go get some vitamin D, man.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
You look like you've never been out. You look like you've sat in that study of yours a
like
little too
vampire.
long.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's kind of that image. It's this weak, frail,
yeah,
impotent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bradley and I talked about this yesterday, and I'll address this, but we had a moment at Southside Sunday when I was teaching that kind of even talked about this. We didn't even really think about the Western theology part of it. But we were talking about the portrayal of Jesus in like paintings. And I was asking him, and I think he'd seen it, but we pulled it up and was just looking at Da Vinci's Last Supper painting, where they're all at the long table. It brought up controversy at the Olympics this year, all that, stuff. But anyway, not just Jesus, but every one of the disciples, just all very feminine looking, white, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like we were like picking out one disciple that possibly represented and looked maybe Middle Eastern, like maybe, but the rest were, all very, very white looking. And that's what Wes says in this, that Jesus in settler theology is resembled as a sheriff. His description, he said, tall, blonde, handsome, soft. And, this is what I said Sunday at Southside. We have a very, not just racially, but in all facets of life, very diverse crowd, at Southside. And it's funny, anytime, even though we all love each other, we're walking through life together and worship together as a family, it's funny, anytime politics or race gets mentioned, it's a little tense moment. I think just and the setting, won't get lost on us. I mean, we're in downtown Birmingham, where a lot of racial tension has existed for years. We pray and hope that God is using Southside to break, some of that stereotype, because we have a very mixed crowd that gather together and worship and see no difference. But I just kind of did the Ron Burgundy major news, breaking news here. I have a major announcement. I was like, in case you haven't noticed, there are black people in this crowd, and there are white people. And I wasn't going Red House,
the Red House,
go ahead,
where white people and black people can come worship Jesus,
or buy furniture,
and Hispanics too. If you haven't seen the Red House commercial, you need to stop right now and go to YouTube.
Really, all of Rhett and Link's commercials were pretty good.
Yeah.
Butt drugs, remember that one? Plenty of parking in the rear. Anyway, but when I mentioned that, I brought it up for this point. I said, because, Jesus was truly a man's man. I mean, you think carpenter before power tools, like calluses on calluses. We talked about the flipping the tables, that it wasn't some plastic, lifetime made table, that it was a wooden table, and all of these things. But I said the reason I brought up the black or white thing is because typically what we've seen in white churches is that white, pale, sissified Jesus. And then if you go to maybe some traditional black churches, you see a picture painted of Jesus as, a black individual, and it's like they're both wrong. He was Middle Eastern, he was a Jewish man, and all of these things. But it's like that picture always gave to me, the one that I grew up seeing, of this very effeminate Jesus. It was like all he was good for. Yeah, it's like he died on a cross, but like we sanitized that to the point that it didn't take a real man to go through that. That he was just sitting waiting on the next little lamb to come by that he could just put on his lap and just pet the lamb. Not saying that Jesus wouldn't pet lambs, but you get what I'm saying. It was the lamb over the shoulder kind of thing like that. But I found this interesting, and let's talk on this for just a second. In Wes's description of Jesus as the sheriff, not only the description of tall, blonde, handsome, soft blue eyes, neatly trimmed beard, all these things, he says this: the sheriff sent by the mayor, and reminder, that was last week, that God is viewed as the mayor, the one that keeps the rules. But the sheriff was sent by the mayor to enforce rules. What do you think about that idea of Jesus, that he is just enforcing the rules that God laid on us, or something like that? Surely there's got to be more to Jesus than just enforcing rules, right?
Well, if the Christian life is just simply following rules, then it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Obviously there are people out there who are not going to follow rules and have trouble struggling, but the average person, they're not going to cheat on their wife. Mm-hmm. They're not going to go murder someone. Right. They're not going to, they can probably get through life without lying at least a whole lot. Mm-hmm. So I think it, to just simply have a list of rules to follow does not require intimacy with God, which is what we were created for.
Yeah.
That's why Jesus, on his famous Sermon on the Mount, he turned all that on its head. Mm-hmm. And he said, I know you've heard it said you don't murder people, but I'm telling you, if you hate someone in your own heart, you've already murdered them,
right?
In your mind. Mm-hmm. And the same with adultery. You've heard it said, don't sleep with your neighbor's wife. Well, I'm telling you, even if you're thinking about it, you're guilty.
Right.
And Jesus, here's the problem with that. A lot of people that are rule following and think the Christian life is just about rule following, they think that Jesus has, by saying that, he's given them a subcategory of rules to follow now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so I can't even think about it. Okay, so I need to get to work on my thought life. I can't even hate somebody. Okay, Jesus wasn't giving you more rules to follow.
Right.
Jesus was simply saying, you're all screwed when it comes to rule keeping.
Right.
He wasn't saying, let me just give you rule 1 and then sub A, B, and C.
1A. Yeah.
Yeah, 1A, 1B. He was saying, look, you think you're the Pharisees, and the Sadducees or whatever, you think you're above these people because you pay your tithe and because you don't sleep with your neighbor's wife and because you don't murder. I'm here to tell you, you all are without excuse, as Paul said. You're all in the same boat. Yeah. You're all sinners in need of a Savior. So he was saying, rule following doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's intimacy with God leads and can lead to keeping the law.
Yeah.
Through the power of the Spirit, through the intimacy with God. And that looks like understanding why you hate your neighbor. Yeah. Understanding why you can't keep your eyes off your neighbor's wife. Understanding why you covet other people's, what they have in their life. Yeah. And those things are resolved through intimacy. They're not resolved through simply, well, I didn't covet today, but you haven't dealt with the problem.
Right.
All of that happens in the realm, I guess, of intimacy.
Yeah.
God's requiring more of us, not in terms of keeping the rules. He's requiring more of us in terms of walking closer, leaning in, being rooted in Him, finding deeper, meaningful relationship with Him.
Yeah. Well, that walking with it goes, and you talk about this often and do a good job with it. The rich young ruler vibe of, I feel like the church is, and we both could say we've been this same guy. So we're not pointing fingers. I think we said that from the trailer to the beginning episodes, that we're not doing this podcast because we got it figured out. We're doing it because we don't. We're
absolutely,
just talking things out.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know you can't tell out there, we do zero preparation for this. Like it's
we really don't.
We have an idea of where we're going. We write down.
Can I make a confession?
Yeah.
I didn't even read ahead this week.
See there. I mean, we give you the honest truth here.
I'm sorry.
He has read it before, though.
I have, but I didn't even know what we were doing when I walked in here.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. Is it's honestly this is, Jesse and I hunt together. We do a lot of life together, and like these are some of the same conversations we have when a mic's not in front of our face. Like we just talk about life.
That was the goal for this.
Yeah,
because
there's enough edited stuff.
Oh my gosh, life is too damn edited.
Yeah,
I don't want to hear.
If you go back a couple episodes, we let Jesse go pee, and we just kept going.
And that may happen again today.
Well, you have had a bunch of coffee, but let's not let it ruin the podcast. But the rich young ruler vibe is what I say in churches. Yeah, you may not be rich, you may not be a ruler, but that wasn't even the part of the story. The real part of the story was Jesus knew what was blocking that young man's heart from truly being all in.
Yeah.
And, I've said this when I've taught this passage, is like, I can almost picture that guy in my mind of like, when he asked Jesus, what do I have to do?
Right.
And Jesus, well, have you kept this, and this? And he goes down, and I can almost picture the guy bowing up. It's like, man, I've done all those things. Like, I'm in.
Yeah.
And he says, well, but this one thing you lack. And it's not a prescription for me or you to sell everything we own. That may not be, our God or our calling. But it's like when Jesus gives him that, then the countenance changes. It says he walked away dejected because it's like, I can't do that. But that was that walking with, that's missing in so many people's lives.
You know what's interesting?
Yeah.
Jesus says one thing you lack. Mm-hmm. He never tells him what it was.
Yeah.
Because he never said out loud what it was.
Sure. Yeah.
But that tells me that in that interaction, Jesus and that man knew exactly what Jesus was talking. That's what I love about Jesus. Mm-hmm. It's like he don't give a shit who's listening if they get it or not.
Right.
I think who wrote that? Was that John or is that?
I don't know.
Is that
That's
Matthew?
In several of the Gospels. Yeah.
Well, picture his disciples going. This is a personal interaction that Jesus had with an individual, but I feel the need to write it down. Mm-hmm. And they write that out.
By the way, don't you love on The Chosen, Matthew's character? He's always got the tablet out and like, I need to write this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
God.
But
if we hadn't told you, go watch The Chosen. If you haven't watched The Chosen.
You got to watch it, man. But yeah, he never says what that thing was. This one thing you lack. Mm-hmm. And we keep going back to this interaction.
Yeah,
we went into that interaction almost every episode because I think that interaction sums up that book. Mm-hmm. It really does. It's the difference between this settler mindset of let me get everything in a row, let me get all the rules laid out, let me establish this sort of neat little world in my mind.
So stop right there because I want to read you this quote that I got from the book. All right. Okay. It goes back to your talk a couple of weeks back, which, by the way, great job.
Thank you.
You were talking about the two kingdoms and this, need that we have as individuals for security, right? Like the job, the money, the food, all this stuff. Listen to what he says about the sheriff. The sheriff's job is to save the settlers by offering security. Isn't that what we long for? Like we really do as humans, even those that are followers in Christ, like the wildness of being called to adventure and the unpredictability of God, like sometimes just really hits us at the core of like, no, but I want what's safe. I want security, but like ultimately we don't.
Right.
But it's just that struggle that John Eldridge says, like we're spiritual amphibians, like in this world, but also in the next, and just the kingdoms and all this stuff that's at play. But what is that need? Like, what is that thing we have for security?
You know what? When I was doing that talk that day, I was kind of going at it from this angle of, we say we want God to meet these needs, like the need for security, the need for sustenance, the need for, the things we love, things we desire. But what we really want through them things is something else, and I said that up there, we want security. We really want to know that we're taken care of,
right?
Sustenance, same deal. We want to know we're taken care of. desire, we want to really know that God is watching us and knows what we love and knows what we desire, and he's going to make provision for that. You know, all these things, like there's a deeper, but when I was standing up there, God whispered, longing. Talk about longing.
Yeah.
And I kind of deviated a little bit. I didn't plan that. And I realized that part of my issue, and I think a lot of people out there, is we haven't gotten acquainted with our longing. There's something beneath the needs, you know, the desire we have to have our needs met, physical, mental, emotional, all these different needs that we have that we ask God for. Why isn't God giving me enough money? Why isn't God giving me enough security? But there's something deeper beneath that, and that's longing.
Yeah.
Because the longing, and this is where we're talking about the difference between keeping the rules and the difference between intimacy. The longing, I just started thinking about this. God just started speaking this to me recently. The longing is for a deep fellowship with the Trinity. And I say that because, you know, John, speaking of John Eldridge again, he just re-released a book that started his whole ministry.
Yeah.
And I went back and started reading it.
I want to as well. Is that Sacred Romance?
Yeah. It's not a marriage book.
Yeah.
When Mike Skelton handed me that book 20 years ago,
Mike,
and he got to read this guy. So I got the book and I looked and I said, "This is a marriage book. I don't want to read. I don't know.
I got to hunt with one Mike Skelton this weekend.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Met his son and his granddaughter.
That's awesome.
We love you, Mike.
Yeah, we love you, buddy. But anyway, he gave me that book. Man, you got to read this. And I remember thinking, what is this? Hey, you need to get married and you need to start reading this.
Right.
But I read it and it just changed.
So this is pre-married,
yeah.
Jesse.
Oh, yeah. I had no intention of getting married at that time in my life. Well, that changed spiritually. That changed the trajectory of my life, that book. And it began, I began to ask questions and understand God in a different way, that God wanted this deep level of intimacy with me as his son. And, well, John says in the book, when I went back and read it, when I went hunting a few weeks by myself, that's all I did. I listened to that book, 7, 8, 12 hours worth of reading. I did in like a couple of days.
Yeah.
Just a book on tape, just listen to it.
Yeah.
And it was so crazy. I was laying in my tent.
Man, that's why you didn't see any deer.
I guess so. I was laying in my tent, and it's like 1 a.m. I'm listening to this book, and the coyotes started going crazy. It was such a weird experience. Yeah. But anyway, he says in this book, he says when he was a kid, he used to go stay with his grandfather. And he said we would go visiting on Sundays. And we would go to friends of his granddad and his relatives. And he said I would sit there and I'd listen. And he said I remember back thinking there was this security and safety in. And he said, I don't think he had words to put to it then, but now he's like thinking back, there was this security and safety in the fact that this has been going on long before me. And man, that struck me since that week, that hunting trip. And I've realized in my heart, and this may be foreign to some people listening, but I have realized in my heart that what I long for most is to be in the company of a fellowship where it doesn't depend on me, because see, rule following depends on you.
Yeah.
If you F that up, you got to start over, and you got to earn that back. And if you mess it up again, you got to go back to the beginning and start it all over. It depends on you.
Yeah.
You know, but this fellowship of the Trinity that's been going on long before we were ever imagined, thought, or God imagined this and thought of us, but long before time, we get to be a part of that. And it does not depend on us, but we find provision in it. We find our desires and our deep longing for life and goodness and adventure and romance and all those things are caught up in that fellowship.
Yeah.
And that just really struck me listening to that.
Yeah.
Because it's like all this time, that deep longing, what I talked about on that day was like, that's what stirred I think that's why God, and it's just kind of a shitty thing to say, but it's like, I think that's why God sort of holds back some things from us. And it's not because he's being an asshole and doesn't want to give you enough food or enough, the job with the right salary. It's not that he doesn't want you to have those things, but I think he withholds things. And it's not that he doesn't provide and give us enough to survive. He does. But I think he withholds things sometimes because he's trying to awaken that longing.
Yeah.
Because that longing is the way back.
Right.
It's the way back to everything that was lost in the garden.
Yeah.
So
that's good stuff. I tell you one thing that came to mind, and then before we do that, quick side note. Jamie says this makes me a psychopath, but one of the things I love about hunting, now granted, what I'm about to say, I'm going to preface, I don't want them 50 yards from me, but I love to walk out of the woods at night, like when it's dark, we've hunted, whatever, no light, and if there's a pack of like coyotes close by, it's so cool to me. Like just to stand there for a sec, like maybe a little bit of moment of boldness, but like just to listen. Now, granted, again, 300 yards plus is what I'm aiming for. If they're 50, I'm headlamps on and I'm hoofing it, but which has happened before. I did that one year, walked out bow season, and I didn't have a pistol or anything. I just had my bow.
Yeah.
And they were close. And I was like, this could be bad.
Well, let me just tell you this, side note.
Yeah.
Have you stayed on the property at night?
No.
You haven't done that yet?
No.
Okay, so when you stay where our camp is, there is a pack of coyotes that hangs out super close.
Okay.
Uncomfortably close.
Yeah. Mike ran one off the other night. There was a deer hanging that we had Fabian had gotten.
Yeah.
And they had gutted it and just hung. It was cold enough. They let it hang, and Mike had like one really, really close to camp. So,
really?
Yeah. He ran it off.
Wow.
Yep.
Why didn't he shoot it?
Good job, Mike.
Yeah.
Anyway. But I tell you the other thing, the more important thing than hunting, this choice and this longing that you're talking about, and this, I think it's God-given. It's instilled in all of us, whether we can name it or not, that
right.
longing is there.
Yeah.
I think about like the stories that we hear of like, a young lady that's grown up without the love of a dad. That they're going to fill that void, that longing some other way.
Yes.
And I think that's what we do, if that makes sense to equate it to our longing for God. It's like it's in there. It's it used to be this cheesy. I know this is hard to imagine a cheesy Christian song, but cheesy Christian song in the '90s. It was like this
Plum
something. I forgot about that.
That's the band name.
But a God-shaped hole,
Plum,
something like that. Okay,
yeah. They actually had some really good songs.
Yes, yeah, they
that
did.
One was.
Yeah,
it was good back then.
The message.
Yeah,
of
the
it.
message was good. It was good back then.
Yeah,
but everybody grabbed onto that message and started using it over and over and over and over again.
Our apologies to Plum and to Steven Seagal. No, just to Plum. Don't worry about it. just to Plum. We appreciate your attempt. But,
I kind of had a little thing for the lead singer of Plum.
Okay.
When I was younger.
Yeah,
she was super cute.
Yeah.
I
don't remember.
Yeah, she was hot.
Okay. But there is, I think that really is a truth, that there is that, hole that only he can fill. In fact, one of the greatest moments in ministry that I had, it was actually a younger child that I'd led to the Lord at like VBS, and she wanted to follow through with baptism, and of course, you talk with them, just make sure, like, kind of understanding what's going on and everything. And I asked the young lady, I said, can you explain to me what, that night, when you met Jesus, like what that felt? And like, she was not coached for it. I didn't tell parents. I mean, just asked the question. And she said, Mr. Keith, the only way I can explain it is I had a hole in my heart that's not there anymore. And I was like, man, that's That's beautiful. Like it's like, okay,
Yeah.
counseling job done. Let's get you in the tank. You know,
Right.
like you're right. You know,
Yeah.
like it was beautiful. It was a beautiful moment, and in fact, it's the first baptism I ever did. And that was a memory I always have. And now she's
That is
an adult now, and that shows my age. But
that's pretty
anyway,
awesome.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, in this. This need for security and the settlers being offered security by the sheriff. I found this interesting. He talks about the sheriff's tactics, and a little silly on some of the names, but again, this book was written in the 70s. So the sugar method, that's the love and kindness that Jesus shows to draw you in, almost a trap. The guilt method, making you feel guilty. And then the boot heel method, this battle, it's talking about the fear of judgment, that if you don't get straight, what you've got to face. And so either the loving kindness, the guilt trip, or the fear. And I'll be honest, that's still a lot of the tactics the church, not a particular church, but the Church of Jesus Christ uses today.
Yeah.
Let's get them in with the loving kindness. Let's don't talk about the other parts of Jesus. Let's guilt them into giving more. Let's guilt them into doing more, or let's just scare the hell out of them. Literally.
Yeah.
Just talk about how painful and fearful it's going to be. And it's like, none of those are great ways to enter into relationship with God versus like that longing that we've talked about, that if we, encourage people to understand that they were created for intimacy, created for relationship, all the way back to that garden moment. That, the loving kindness of a God that creates a people that he knows full well he's going to have to rescue in another way.
Yeah.
But he still gave us the choice to do it, and still draws the intimacy in of like in that moment to Adam and Eve of like, hey, it's not over.
Right.
Like, yeah, you messed up, but you haven't sealed the whole deal here. Like there's grace.
Right.
Jesus is talked about in that beginning. You talked about it, the one that, would, step on the serpent and it would bruise his heel and all this. And it's there. It was the plan. And even Scripture says slain before the foundation of the world. It means that the rescue mission was planned before the creation ever happened. That if we could get lost in that, and you can lay there, make your head hurt, thinking about that stuff. But the love that a creator God has, that he just creates us knowing that I'm going to have to go down and rescue these people.
Yeah.
But it's going to be worth it.
Right.
That's an amazing thing. Well, on to Pioneer Theology. Jesus is the scout. And I love this quote. He says the scout, and just as opposite, I guess I should do this, as the tall, blonde, and handsome and all this, that this is a rough and rugged character, a man's man, a little bit of a wildness to him. But it says that the scout, Jesus, rides ahead to find out which way the pioneer should go. How does that make you feel as a believer to know, you famously have talked about this in my life, about Jesus going ahead and behind, and him and his sin, and some of the imagery God's given you of that. But
Psalms 139. Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Well, Jesus in this book, represented as the scout, he's a Jesus that I can trust, that I can feel safe with. It's funny because people like these little communities. They like these little gated communities they can stay in and they can feel safe, But if you get outside, I remember going to going on mission trips to other not countries. I've only been to one. I went on one and I didn't like it, so I'm not going to probably won't go on another one. But I just remember
that was the one somebody got really sick on, didn't they?
Oh yeah, a girl crapped her pants. It was hilarious.
She said she can handle that water. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, she said she could handle the tainted water.
Yeah,
and she drank the water.
Breaking news: it did not go as planned.
Oh, and she was wearing white pants when it happened. It was a bad deal.
Bad call.
It was I was 13, to me, it was hilarious.
Yeah, I was going to say you laughed.
I did laugh.
Yeah.
I feel terrible about laughing.
Yeah.
But I did.
So, sorry, Plum. Sorry, Lady on the Mission Trip. And Steven Seagal, you still suck. Our apologies to everyone but Steven Seagal. Anyway.
But here's what's interesting is when it was Belize, Central America, that I went to, there was a guy that was our guide, okay? Mm-hmm. And his name was, brace yourself, Artemio Call.
Artemio. Okay.
Sounds it was like
Arsenio Hall.
He had a Belizean talk show. I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. But that was his name, Artemio
Arsenio
Call.
was a good show back in the day. I liked it.
I did too.
Yeah.
Artemio was a former gang member in Belize who'd given his heart to Jesus. One of the most incredible guys I've ever met. I will always cherish that 2 weeks that I spent with Artemio.
Yeah.
But you know, Belize, in this part of Belize, there's resort Belize where it's safe and pretty safe, I guess, and unless you go to the outskirts to get your weed or something. But you know, it's resort town safe. Yeah. You know, but then just like Jamaica is the same deal.
Yep. But
once you get outside of that to the rural areas, it's very unsafe.
Yeah.
So, but whenever I was with Artemio, like I didn't care. We'd go exploring and we would go into parts of the town we were close to. And there were some incidences where if he had not been with us, we would have been in trouble. But whenever I think about this sort of illustration about Jesus being the scout, I think about Artemio. And I think that's true with Jesus because the Holy Spirit, Jesus, interacts with us through the Holy Spirit. He, in Acts, he says, I'm giving you my Spirit as a helper to come, and he's going to lead you into all truth, right? So that Spirit of Jesus is always going to lead us out. We can't. It's not stationary. That's why the institutional church, whereas it does have its strengths and there are people that are finding Jesus in it, but it's never enough for the believer, the growing believer. It just at some point it's never enough because Jesus, the Spirit of Jesus, is always leading us out. He's always leading us into wildness. Now it may be the wildness of our own story or of our own soul at some point, but I think it always goes. Our friend who shall not be named sold all his stuff and moved to a country, and now he's wanted in other countries. Yeah, and he'll tell you he did that because of the wildness of God. That this Spirit of Jesus, this scout Jesus, went ahead and led him into that place. Not to say that God's going to do that with everybody, but.
Can we stop just a second and say that unnamed brother, we know he listens. We love you.
Yeah, we love you
praying
too, man.
For you.
Yeah, we are praying for you. But yeah, like there is, but for me, whenever God has led me into something, can I tell you a quick story?
Man,
when
you got that mic, bro. You tell me anything you want.
I'm going to tell you a quick story. There are probably two people. There's probably 3 or 4 people on the planet that know that this happened. The first time in my life when I felt the Spirit of God leading me into a dangerous, I say dangerous, then it was.
Right.
Dangerous territory was when I was 16 years old.
This was back in those Keeping It Real days.
Keeping It Real, man.
Jesse Crowe.
West Blockton High School.
Yeah.
There was a kid, I'm not going to say his name, who was having a really hard time. And I saw this kid every day. And I would always interact with him, but he was super quiet. And we would talk, exchange pleasantries or whatever. And we ate lunch together. And So every day at lunch, there were some kids that sat at the end of you remember the long row, the cafeteria tables where it's got the round seat.
Yep.
This long stretch of tables. Well, these kids that sat at the end of that, close to the wall, and me and this fellow would sit kind of about midway down, and I would always try and talk to him and interact with him. And I didn't have a lot of friends either, and I didn't, I was kind of a nerd or whatever. And so, well, every day those kids would throw stuff at him and pick on him, and I would always just like, man, don't worry about them, and like me and him, they would kind of give up on it. Well, one day I was sitting at home, and the quiet time days, you do your quiet time. Yeah. I would do my quiet time. I would get alone with God, and I'd have a book, whatever our youth pastor at the time was giving us to read through, or he would tell us to read this, or and I would read through it, and I would pray and stuff, and I felt the Spirit of God. And what about this guy? And I'm like, what God? Like what? Like what do you want me to do? And I felt that burning. You felt that, right? That burning in your heart. And I'm like, well, maybe I should witness to him. Yeah. And God was like, no, that ain't it. You know what it is. And I knew God's like, you need to confront the people that are messing with him. Yeah. And I knew it in my heart. Now, these guys were bigger than me. They were much bigger than me. Yeah. And I didn't do it the next day. Like, it was 2 days. I prayed and I struggled with this. But I knew, going back now, that's a familiar. It's not a guilt. That's what was interesting. It wasn't guilt. It was I don't even know how to describe it. It was like I don't say the word adventure, but it was like, God's calling me into a treacherous place. And guilt couldn't touch that. It was this weird fire that I had inside of me, and God was like, you need to confront that. Yeah. I'll be with you. You need to deal with it. So 2 days I prayed, and I'm reasoning with God. I'm like, God, I just don't know if I can do that. I don't know what if they hit me? What if they punch me? Yeah. And God was like, I'll be with you. Like, go into this. Yeah. And so this one particular day, I got up with this resolve. I'm doing it. Like, I'm going to say something. If they mess with him, and they wouldn't mess with him every day. Right. But this particular day, I got up. God, if something happens, I will intervene in your name. I'll do it. Yeah. So that day was worse than the others. I didn't know this at the time, but some things had happened in his life that were very tragic. And he was going through some stuff at that point. I didn't know that till later on. Yeah. They started throwing stuff at him and messing with him. And sometimes they would get him to walk down there and sit with him, and they would make jokes about him and like put their arm around, like they were kind of pretend like his friend, and say vulgar stuff about him with girls and stuff. And well, this particular day they're throwing stuff at him, and I was like, and it got worse. Well, it was much more intense that day, more than it ever had been. So I get up. I can still feel the way I felt. God, it was like, I walked down, and the guy I said something to was about a foot taller than me. And I said, I don't remember what I said. It's not important, I guess. But I said, man, back off, leave him alone. And I was shaking and stuff. And he goes, man, go sit down or whatever. And I got in his face. And he's sitting down and I'm standing up. I said, leave him alone. I'm pointing my finger in his face. I was like, if you got a problem with him, you got a problem with me. Yeah. He stands up. I'm looking up at that point. So I stand on the table. And at this point, I have the whole lunchroom staring at me. And I'm in his face, and I lose it. And it wasn't, I screamed. I cussed at him. That's, right. Back then you didn't do. Right. But I had, like, the fire of the Spirit of God had just exploded. Yeah. And well, I just started. Well, the other guy never got up, and he looked. Dare I say it? He looked frightened.
Right.
And at that point, I felt God with me. It was like just surrounded.
Mm-hmm.
It was incredible. And so I get worked up, and everybody's gathering around. It's like we're about to start throwing punches. And I felt an arm come around my chest and pick me up and carry me out of the lunchroom. Mm. And it was my best friend, Dustin. Mm. And he was like kind of laughing, mm-hmm. like kind of way to go kind of deal. Like, dude, what happened?
Right.
You know? And some of the teachers confronted me and said, you shouldn't have done that. Well, they sent us to the office, and, I don't remember what happened, but he made me shake hands with the guy, mm-hmm. and I shook his hand. And so anyway, that was the first time, though, that I had ever, like, done that, that I'd ever stepped out and walked through with God into something. At the time, now that wouldn't have been dangerous.
Yeah.
I work at a high school. I have to confront students all the time, not all the time, but from time to time with, I break up fights and stuff, mm-hmm. So it's like, but at that time for me, for 14-year-old Jesse Crowe, that was terrifying.
Yeah.
But that was the first time I'd ever walked with God into something like that. Like, and that was that Jesus. Mm-hmm. That was not, let's play sweet. Let's keep sweet. Let's don't, rock the boat. Let's be nice. Let's be kind. Let's hand out our track, and let's not, ever say a cuss word or be bad. That was that Jesus.
Yeah.
And that was that. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, that's beautiful.
I didn't mean to go off.
No, that's an awesome story. You took me to one in my mind I hadn't thought about in a long time. In fact, there's probably a book on that shelf behind you that I had to read during it. But I had an experience in seminary. This would have been late 90s, and a missions class that I took, a workshop. I was actually a professor. I can still remember his name, Dr. Ken Taylor. And it was this very experiential workshop where it's like we had papers we had to write, we had all the busy work or whatever you want to call it, studies, but it was very you had to go on mission in New Orleans. That's where I went to seminary. I went to an extension center in Birmingham, but would go on campus as well. And one of the places we went was the Desire Projects in New Orleans, one of the roughest projects in all of America. And I just remember feeling like they told us, like, hey, it's a bad area. Mm-hmm. That's all we knew.
Yeah.
But I remember Dr. Taylor had been there many times.
Yeah.
People knew him. I go back to your story in Belize. Like, I just felt comfortable.
Right.
We get back to the classroom setting, and he says, well, I just want you to know the block we were at today, and I forget, it was 1998 or whatever, in 1997 led the United States in murders.
Whoa.
Like that block. And I was like, ooh, I am glad I did not know. Like, maybe Dr. Taylor wouldn't have been enough, in that moment. But, man, it's so wild to see that represented in some of those stories, which kind of goes to the next quote. I love this one. Jesus as the scout, not just of which way the pioneers should go, but if you find yourself wanting to be a pioneer and not a settler, by the way, spoiler alert, that's what this book is getting at, that, mm-hmm. Settler theology is just that. Settling and pioneering is about this adventure. But it says this, by observing Jesus, the pioneers learn what pioneering is all about.
Mm. Yeah.
I had some advice years ago that was so... I love this dichotomy of it. It was so profound, but yet so elementary. And the suggestion was, and I don't even remember, it was a small group I was part of. I think I know who it was, but as we were sitting around, someone encouraged the season that I was going on, says, have you thought about reading the Gospels? And my first thought was like, no. Like, I mean, I've read them a bunch. Mm-hmm. I know all the stories. Like, why would I read that again? And the person was like, it just seems to me like you're really calling, like this is start of church at Southside or getting close to that time. You're really calling us to mimic the lives of Jesus. Like, wouldn't that be the best place to read? It's like, yeah, he's all in the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, we even said it, like he's on the first page, he's on the last page, like everywhere in between. That the old saying, the scarlet thread that runs through Genesis to Revelation. But like if you really want to know about Christ, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the places to go.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I did that, I just prayed. I started at Matthew, and I said, Lord, will you let me read this like it's the first time?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't explain other than feel led to say this, maybe that would be good advice for somebody listening today too. Like, don't let the gospel not be the good news, but let it be old news.
Yeah.
And read it with that perspective of, let me catch the wildness and the unpredictability, the adventure, the toughness of Jesus. You know, all of these things that maybe get lost in that painting that we have in our mind.
Yeah.
Because I promise you, if you read it through that lens and ask the Spirit to walk with you, and maybe I would even encourage this, like, you know, don't set out and say, hey, I'm going to read all of Matthew tonight. Like, ingest it slowly.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, ask God, what do you have for me here?
Yeah.
And I promise you it'll come alive, and you'll see things about Jesus like, whoa, like I never really was taught that, or I missed that.
And I think God really speaks the loudest when we linger.
Oh, man.
You know?
You know, one of the things that came about, like you've heard me teach on it before, but the thought that I had never picked up on, Jesus in the Gospels, and if I'm right, I may be wrong in this, but if I'm right, I can't think of a single instance that this happened.
Yeah.
Where Jesus got really, really angry or upset at a broken sinner.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Where he got upset was the ones who had the law memorized and were missing him face to face.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, that's where he overturns tables. Now, I know there were other people in the crowd that were changing money and, you know, selling items and things like that. But when he has encounters where you hear him throw out, you brood of vipers, or you whitewashed tombs, or you cup that's clean on the outside, but on the inside's dirty. You know, the whitewashed tombs that's like, yeah, it's clean on the outside, but on the inside it's dead man bones. It's always addressed to the Pharisees, who the people of the day would say, if anybody knows God, it's them. They got the law memorized. Like the first 5 books of the Bible, they could quote.
Right.
Like you and I could quote Billy Madison. You know, like, I mean, that's where our knowledge goes, folks. So sorry about that. But, you know, they were the ones. And then Jesus even says something crazy, not that he's crazy, but to the listener even back then.
Yeah.
Would have said, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, like you'll never enter the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And it had to be people in the crowd that's like, well, I'm out then.
Right.
Like I don't have the law memorized.
Right.
But then you see encounters where this, like the widow's mite.
Yeah.
You know, where she goes up and puts 2 small copper coins that are like 1/10 of a penny.
Yeah.
And he says, that woman, she gave everything.
Right.
You know, and then the contrast of where they'd stand up like Bozo's grand prize game and just toss money into this, it's like a horn-shaped thing, and they'd throw and they'd clang and all this stuff, and they would try to draw attention. Look how much money I'm giving. And the way it was explained to me, even in seminary, was like today's math. It's like if they went and changed a dollar bill to get 100 pennies.
Yeah.
You know, so that it was more coins to throw.
Right.
You know, it was a show.
Yeah. So
they were giving more monetarily, but Jesus looks at somebody in the wildness of him and says, but that lady, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
And so it gets back to that Sermon on the Mount, that it's a heart, you know, and not just this outward.
I also love the fact that
appearance.
Jesus was, he didn't discriminate with rich or poor when it came to the person's faith. Yeah. Like, because I think about the Chosen, because I just watched season 4, the centurion, who was a wealthy guy, who he had it all, had the nicest house, had the he had 2. Apparently, according to the Chosen, he had a wife on the side, you know, or a girl on the side.
Right.
He had everything a man could want, but he comes to Jesus and he's just broken.
Yeah.
and he says, look, you don't even have to come see him because I have this much faith that you're going to do it.
Even a sense of, I'm not worthy to have you come in my house.
Yeah. And it's like, that always struck me because Jesus was like, he really did not care what your station in life was. Because he looks at this guy and he was just awed by the guy's faith, you know?
Yeah.
And I just think that's pretty cool. That's like, he didn't, it really does not matter.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
So if you want to be a pioneer, I would say read about the ultimate pioneer. Don't let the Gospels be old news. Maybe let that be something that heading into this new year, that maybe you just strike up a relationship again with the Gospels and see how Jesus interacted. And here's one thing you'll see, another quote that's from the book. I've actually got a couple more, and then we'll close out today. But Jesus the scout is always ready for adventure. Always.
Yeah.
Underline that word "always" in my book. But this is kind of where I really kind of wanted to close out because there's two quotes here. The call to move out, come hell or high water, it's always disturbing. And then he says there's something disturbing about the scout. You see, there's a settler hidden in even the bravest pioneer. That even if you're listening today and saying, well, man, I've listened now. This is the third week I've listened to this breakdown of this compare and contrast of this book. And it's like, I find myself more in that pioneering. Just know this, there's still a settler in there somewhere.
Yeah.
That needs, that adventure, that needs to, okay, let me recenter and get back and not try to do this on my own.
Right.
Jesse and I've talked a lot with our work sometimes that we don't invite God in, to that place. It's like, I'm settled into the rules and handling that myself. But,
right.
If you truly want to be, a pioneer that's walking with Jesus, there's still some settler ways, and probably will be until the day you die.
Right.
That we constantly have to, not in a sense of duty, obligation, following the rules, but like just for intimacy's sake.
Right.
Of like, hey, will you, push some of that back again? Like it's welling up. Like even, I find myself even with what we do now on Sundays, and many will look at us, and we've had conversations where it's you and I don't view it this way, but they view it as a bragging on us kind of way of what we're doing. Man, I wish I could do that. And it's like, all credit to God on that. It's His calling. But even with it being something that many would consider pioneering, and it is in some ways, it still can become that settler thing of just we've settled in to, well, this is just what we do.
Right.
But I still go back to those initial feelings of adventure.
Yeah.
When God called us in, and I have to remind myself, it's still an amazing thing of what's happening in our midst, even though it becomes kind of routine.
Yeah.
But what do you think about that there's a settler in all of us? Do you agree with that? Wes, on that?
Well, and I think that you sort of you have to reorient.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reorient often. And that's why, again, that goes back to the intimacy thing. It's like, if we have an encounter with God and God leads us in this, on this great adventure or whatever, and we see our heart change and see all these things change, you see this a lot of times, especially with younger Christian folk, is like, then they'll kind of dial it back, get back into their life, and it's like, it's back to normal kind of thing. And they may pray, every day, but it's not. So that's why we have to reorient. Yeah. We have to reorient every day. Come back to Jesus. Give him our lives. Give him our hearts. The prayers we pray. Give you everything, everyone. I give you my spirit, soul, and body, heart, mind, and will. So there has to be this reorientation where we go, okay, my life is super structured today, super normal. Work is this, work is that. It's the same old, it's the mundane. So God, where are you in this? Yeah. Like, what are you leading me into today?
Yeah.
And again, the heart of a man, the heart of a woman is vast. It has its own frontier, right?
Yeah.
And so typically when God has us, which most of us are in our day to day, it gets mundane. It gets kind of boring, or it gets business as usual. And then, some of us out there like what we do, and it's, but and some of us don't. Some of us are, in jobs that we're trying to get by, trying to get to a point where we can retire or whatever. But it's in that mundane where we have to lock in to the Spirit of God. Mm-hmm. There has to be time where we re-engage, where we reorient. And God, what do you have today? Where are you leading me today?
Right.
And I think that is, I do believe that there is always more. Somebody told me that one time when I had this encounter with God, and I was like, man, I was telling this person, I was like, man, I feel like every time God reveals something to me about myself or about someone else, but usually about myself, it's like I thought we were kind of not done, but like it's like, but there's always more.
Yeah,
that's what we have to remember. That's why intimacy is important. That's why reorientation with the Spirit of God is important. That's why time with God, time spent with God, silence, solitude, reading, prayer, fasting. That's why all of those things are so important to keep that part of us that blazes the trails, that stays on the frontier, that doesn't turn back to settler life.
Yeah.
It's so important to engage with God in that way and through those things, through those spiritual disciplines, because it's all about reorientation. It's all about staying with Jesus. I can imagine him coming. Don't set up camp here. We're not staying here. We're going to keep moving.
Yeah.
There's more. There's more down the trail. I've been up. I've seen it, So, that's what I would say is like, and I'm saying it to myself because that's easy. Past couple of days my time with God has been kind of hit or miss because we've had a lot going on, and I have spent time with God, but it's like this morning, the past 2 mornings I've had to do it on long drives because I haven't had time to, or hadn't made time really. I think everyone can make time, but I mean, it's about reorientation. It's about re-engaging with God, and it's and that's an easy thing to do, but it's also very difficult because it doesn't require much of you in terms of like you don't have to go to your mass and pray and talk to the priest. You don't have to, you don't have to. There's nothing you have to do in terms of like physically, but it's more about mental engagement with God. And anyway, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
no, that's great. So I would say to the listener, then we've mentioned a couple of ways that you can re-engage or reorient, if you want to use those words. Reading, praying, going back to the Gospels, all this stuff. But better than listening to two yahoos like us, we would encourage you to pray. Ask the Father, like, hey, how can I do that? Like, because your heart, your life story, your experiences are different than ours, and that's the beauty of walking with God, is that He will speak directly to your heart, let you know, like, hey, here's what I want you to do. Here's how I want to spend time with you today.
Right.
And so encourage you with that. I've got one last thought, and we'll close with this and be back with chapter 4 coming up soon, and excited to do that. But Jesse, you mentioned the word trailblazer, and that's the last quote I got, that he is the ultimate pioneer, the ultimate trailblazer, the scout. And, I love, this is definitely something that's straight out of Scripture, even though it's in Old West terms. But those that long to see God. There's been many people ask, Moses, just let me, have your glory pass by, and like even just the backside of God, he has to come down off the mountain with a veil, on his face. But us in the church age, as if with unveiled faces, the word says, reflect His glory. But going back to last week's podcast, the term for God in a pioneering way is the trail boss. And it says that if you have seen the scout, you've seen the trail boss. That Jesus is that representation of who God is. And so if you want to see God, if you want to meet God, then by all means, the way to that is through the Scout. It's to find Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And so if you want to meet God, see God, that's the door that we enter. It's faith in Him. It's the pressure's off you. It's nothing that you can do.
Right.
His grace is enough, and so that's the way we enter in. And man, it's a beautiful life. It's a life of adventure and callings and all these things that really, if we walk with Him, there's never a dull moment. And I think Jesse and I would both tell you, even with us sitting here with a mic and a podcast, we do not always do that perfectly. We constantly confess to one another of ways that we're not walking with God in areas, and so I would encourage that as well. Find you a friend, and hopefully you found that here where it's an outlet for your faith, but also people that walk with you. Pray about who you can be honest with, because you can't with everybody.
You can't. You're right.
But seek wisdom and counsel from God and the Holy Spirit on that, and share some intimate conversations of struggles and victories and all those things, because it definitely makes life easier. So hope that you found that here as well, and you can always reach out to us, but definitely those that walk with you in your daily life, seek out some of those, and we'll be back with more of this. Thank you for joining us, and we love you guys, and we'll see you next time.